I heard you finally divorced my son. A sudden phone call from my mill. You're just not good enough for my son. That's why I kept telling you to divorce Mason sooner. What? I finally realized that I couldn't get along with my mill since earlier. Mason and I divorced 3 years ago. Huh. I almost burst out laughing at my mill's anticlimactic voice, but I managed to hold it in somehow. I'm Faith. I've been living with Choco, the cat I rescued 2 years ago. Until 3 years ago, I was married. I met my ex-husband, Mason, through a friend, and we got married. Until then, I didn't know his true nature, but little by little, I began to understand Mason's true colors after we got married. He graduated from college, but Mason, who had never been scolded much before, made mistakes at work several times, got scolded by his bosses and clients, didn't like apologizing, and quit his job soon after we got married. For a while, Mason kept it from me, and I only noticed when I found his withholding tax slip in the room, even though it wasn't the end of the year. When I confronted him, he said we were married, so it was okay. Mason then worked for a different company, but it didn't suit him, so he changed jobs again. I suggested he work in assembly line production if he didn't like dealing with people, but he had this strange pride that he couldn't do a job even a high school graduate could. But he couldn't remain unemployed, so I urged Mason, who didn't seem eager to work, and now he's somehow working at a dispatch company. Mason has a handsome face, so there were always other women around. He cheated on me several times while we were dating. Each time, I threatened to break up with him, but Mason would say, "The others are just for fun. You're the only one for me, Faith." And foolishly, I would forgive him, go back to him, and the cycle of being cheated on would repeat. When I finally decided to break up with Mason for real, he surprised me by proposing with a ring. My parents strongly opposed it, warning me that I would definitely struggle, but I was filled with a mysterious confidence that I could reform Mason. So, I defied my parents' objections and married him. It was a naive belief that everything would work out if I just held firm, but I soon realized how mistaken I was. However, reality wasn't so sweet, and Mason turned out to be a mama's boy, while Mel saw me as her enemy for taking her son away. Since my in-laws' house and workplace were far away, we didn't live together, but my Mel called me every day. "What's Mason doing? Are you making sure Mason eats properly? You're not making Mason lonely, are you?" Just trivial phone calls. Instead of calling me, she should call Mason himself. But I didn't want to be disliked by my mill just after getting married, so I couldn't strongly retort and ended up apologizing. I asked Mason to reduce the frequency of in-and-outs visits and calls from my mother-in-law, but he said, "Why? It's fine, isn't it? Don't you hate it when my mom calls you or comes over every day?" "Not really. My mom is bored at home. You should be a companion for her." Huh. So, I asked my mother to have Mason call and visit me every day, just like my mill did. "Mason, what's Faith doing now? Are you making sure Faith eats properly? Are you properly grateful to Faith?" I had my mother say the things my mother-in-law had said to Mason. Surprisingly, Mason quickly reacted. "Hey, can you tell your mother to stop calling me every day? It can't be helped, right? My mother has free time too. I can't answer the phone to speak with her, because I have to talk to Mason's mother, so you have to talk to her." "No, that's not what I meant." Mom was so happy. Normally, she would get scolded if she called every day to talk about nothing important, but Mason was so kind and told her she could call as often as she wanted. I never said that. That's strange, isn't it? Because when I asked you to tell your mom to stop calling me every day, you said you didn't care about my mom calling you every day, right? Just because I said that doesn't mean she has to call me every day. It's driving me crazy. Then tell your mother the same thing. My mother is different. It's exhausting because it's your mother. It's the same for me. Then you should answer your mom's calls. I will not answer any calls from your mom from now on. After discussing with Mason, I sent a message to my mill asking her to contact Mason for everything in the future, and I blocked her calls and messages. However, when my mill realized she couldn't reach me, she started visiting more often. She used to only come on weekends, but now she started coming even on weekdays when I wasn't home due to work. She used the spare key that Mason gave her without my permission to enter the house and rummage through things as if they were her own. I was really shocked when I came home from work on a weekday and found my Mill comfortably sitting in the house. Her behavior escalated, like when she said, "Huh, where's that Louis Vuitton bag?" "Oh, that. It was lovely, so I took it." "Why would you take it without asking? Isn't the wife's stuff the same as mine?" "Don't be so uptight, Faith." She steals my personal belongings or says, "Oh, Faith, I borrowed a little money." Huh. She would also take money without permission. Then, on another day, at noon, the doorbell rang, and when I checked, it was the pizza delivery man. Mill was still coming over to our house uninvited as usual, and she said, "Oh, Faith, make sure to pay for the pizza." What? She ordered delivery without my permission, and asked me to pay for it. I had no choice but to pay for it, but I received 2 pizzas. "There's nothing for you, Faith. If you want some, order it yourself." She made me pay for it, and my Mill and Mason ate the pizza in front of me with relish. I was furious. Right then and there, in front of Mill and Mason, I took the money Mill had taken from Mason's wallet and the money for the pizza, and left. I ended up eating barbecue alone. That night, I didn't go home but stayed at a manga cafe, returning home early the next day. When I got back, I was shocked to see the mess left from the food they ate strewn all over the place. From that day on, I hardly spoke to Mason. Then Mason took that as an opportunity to start cheating. At first, he'd meet up with the other woman or exchange messages on the sly, but when he noticed I wasn't interested, he boldly talked to his mistress on the phone right in front of me or made plans to go out. I began to wonder if this guy even graduated from college, with his unbelievably outrageous behavior. And to top it off, now Mill got into my car without permission and caused an accident. Fortunately, it was a single car accident, and thankfully, no one else was involved, but my car was wrecked. Mill ended up with a broken hip and was hospitalized. It's Faith's fault for not driving Mom around. It's your fault. How are you going to take responsibility? For some reason, Mason and Phil started blaming me for the accident, and I lost my patience. Fine. I'll take responsibility and tell the police that my car was stolen and that every time she comes to my house, she steals my personal belongings and money. What are you talking about? The police won't do anything about family matters. Doe. You didn't know. No matter how much she may be a relative, she is guilty of theft, which is a crime of grand larceny, since we do not live in the same house, and moreover, she is not my biological mother. Well then, I guess I'll go file a complaint now. As I stood up, Mason tried to stop me, and Phil berated me. Who's the real scoundrel here? Your wife is a thief, your son is a cheater, and you, Phil, who never apologizes for your family's sins and tries to put the blame on others, I think you're more of a scoundrel. What? I spread out the printed photos of Mason's affair and the messages on the desk. Mason, let's get a divorce. Of course, you'll pay the alimony in one lump sum. What are you talking about? I've already talked to a lawyer. A lawyer? Isn't that excessive? If it is, then sign the divorce papers and stamp them and pay the alimony right now. That way, I won't have to bother with a lawyer. You know damn well I can't afford that kind of money. Besides, divorce. After openly cheating like that, I don't see any reason why I shouldn't divorce you. But Faith, you love me, don't you? Not at all. I've had enough of you, who doesn't protect me from your mother, doesn't turn well, and just keeps cheating. What? If you can't pay, then I'll leave it to the lawyer. With that, Phil intervened, asking me to wait. If I pay it all at once, you won't go to the lawyer or the police, right? That's right. If you simply comply with my request, I won't sue. Fine. Since the bank's not open now, I'll pay it properly later. I'll let him sign the divorce papers right away. Dad, why? Why, you ask? Phil, visibly angry, shouted at Mason. Don't you understand anything? If you get sued, it'll damage my career. And if the neighbors find out, you'll be the laughing stock. My pride won't allow it. Listen, I'll lend you the money this time, but in return, pay me back every month. if you can't, I'll make you sell your organs or work on a crab fishing boat or whatever it takes to pay me back. Got it? Okay, okay. Phil was very concerned about appearances. Mason was forced to sign the divorce papers by Phil, and he even had to write a memorandum about repayment. While Phil left everything regarding the household to Mill, he was top-notch in his job, even holding a high position. So, he seemed to want to settle things amicably if it would put him in a disadvantageous position. However, being money-minded, Phil made Mason, his real son, sign a memorandum for the loan he gave him. Since the apartment was in my name, I removed all of Mason's belongings from the room. Well, most of what he had were clothes, manga books, and hobbies, as I had been using the furniture and appliances since before we got married. I got the keys back from Mason and told him to return the spare key he had given Mill to the mailbox. Phil assured me he would retrieve the key if they didn't return it. Later, I received compensation for damages from Phil in my account, and the key was returned to the mailbox. Mason was still mumbling about how he didn't want a divorce and who would take care of his injured mother, but I simply replied that I don't know, blocked Mason's incoming calls and messages, and cut off contact with him. I moved out soon after and started a new life. 3 years have passed since then. When I had completely forgotten about them, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I picked up, wondering who it might be, and it turned out to be none other than my ex Mill. Faith. Long time no see. I'm glad your number hasn't changed. What does she want after all this time? What'd you call for? Question after question popped up, but my chatty Mill started talking before I could even speak. You were such a horrible wife, weren't you? You never came to see me when I was injured and hospitalized, and you never came to take care of me after I got discharged from the hospital. And you moved out on your own. I don't know what you're thinking. Why should I? I don't have any obligation to take care of you, do I? Well, look at that. I couldn't reach you at all when I called, and you never replied to my messages, so I got a new phone. I really wonder what was good about you. As my Mill's complaints seemed endless, I asked her what she called for by getting a new phone and calling me. Then, so, you finally divorced my son. You were never a match for him. I've been telling you to divorce Mason as soon as possible. Excuse me. What is it? Finally, I grasped that my Mill's rambling didn't make sense. Mason and I divorced 3 years ago. I almost laughed at the deflated tone of my Mill's voice, but I managed to hold it back. We divorced 3 years ago when you had that accident with my car and ended up hospitalized. Mason was cheating, and well, there were various reasons that led to the divorce, like him being a mama's boy who never stood up for me and didn't do any housework despite splitting expenses equally. No way, I got my alimony paid in one lump sum by Phil on Mason's behalf, and I haven't contacted him at all since the divorce. Well, I've blocked all incoming calls. But Mason, Then who called me? According to my Mill, a man claiming to be Mason called recently, begging for money to pay for the divorce settlement and saying he didn't have any. So, he gave the money to a man claiming to be Mason's friend. I have no idea even if you ask me. So, the man who claimed to be Mason's acquaintance and took the money, he's definitely a scammer. Definitely a scammer. No way. I don't know how much was taken, but it seems my Mill was swindled out of an amount shocking enough to leave her in shock. But it's none of my business. Well then. As I try to hang up the phone, Mill grabs my attention. Hey, don't you think I'm pitiful? Well, I genuinely feel sorry for her, and I sympathize, but ultimately, it's not my problem. I'll make sure to be careful myself and give my parents a call later to warn them. I consider this a stroke of luck. Can you lend me some money? Why don't you ask your son? But Mason's changed his contact info. My husband doesn't know either, and I don't even know where he is now. Please, I'm begging you. I always knew she was shameless even when I was married, but I never imagined she'd be this shameless. I replied to her, I see. Yay, well, if you give me back all the cash from the car and appliances that turned into scrap after you guys took them, as well as the money stolen from my wallet, then I'll consider it. There is no way I can repay that. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Asking something like that from someone who's become a stranger to you shows you lack common sense. I could even start demanding it from you right now. Don't you have any compassion? Unfortunately, I have absolutely zero compassion for you guys. Unbelievable. Breaking up with Mason and divorcing you was the right decision. I'm done. Forget it. My mill calls unilaterally, then hangs up unilaterally. I don't want to be bothered by her pestering for money again, so I've blocked her new contact details. I thought it was a nice touch, although I was surprised at Mason not telling Mill that he had divorced me 3 years ago, and I was also surprised that she had fallen for the scam and taken my money. Well, my Phil tends to blabber, so he must have been telling Mason not to tell my Mill. My Phil will be retiring soon, and no matter how much he has been scammed, he will be furious if he finds out that someone from somewhere has taken the large sum of money he had saved for his retirement. Since my Phil is retiring soon, he'd probably demand that my Mill work to repay the money, no matter how much she begs. My Mill said she hadn't worked at all since she married my Phil, so I wonder if she can even find a job. Karma always comes back to bite you, huh, Choco? Choco, basking in the sunlight on the windowsill, responded with a meow and a yawn. After divorcing my ex-husband, I became interested in cat rescue activities after I started raising Choco in the apartment I moved to. A friend of mine was originally involved in volunteer rescue activities, and now that I had more time on my hands, I joined her for adoption events. I fell in love at first sight with Choco, whom I met there. I continued to show up at the rescue organization where my friend was involved, offering to help with anything I could. They never minded answering my questions, and they were always kind, never making a face when I asked. They also always asked about Choco's well-being, showing genuine concern. I'm proud to have formed good relationships with such wonderful people. One of them, a man, and I are planning to have dinner together. He seemed to have taken care of Choco before, so he has even more affection for her. He said it would be great if he could keep Choco, but he already had 3 rescue cats living in his house, so he was hesitant about taking on more. When I offered to take Choco, he seemed delighted. He's a true cat enthusiast, always discussing rescue cats, his own pets, and stories about Choco. When I mentioned how coming home tired from work and being greeted by cats makes all the tiredness vanish, he understood completely. Our conversation became animated, and for the first time in a while, I felt truly happy chatting with a man. I'm still not keen on marriage, but this time, I want to take it slow, without rushing, and carefully assess my partner, with the hope of eventually building a wonderful family together.